In 1918, Britain stands on the winning side of the greatest war the modern world has ever seen. But behind the parades and the flags, the empire has done something that victories aren't supposed to do. It has quietly bankrupted itself. The war ends and the bill comes due. Before the first shots of 1914, Britain is the world's banker, the empire's capital flowing outward like a tide from the city of London. By the armistice, that tide has reversed, and the nation that once lent to everyone is now begging for time. Britain has won the war, but lost its financial position at the very top of the global system. The numbers alone tell the story of a superpower suddenly living on credit. National debt swells from roughly £600 million in 1914 to around $7 billion by 1918, a jump so violent it rewires the state itself. And a large share of what Britain owes is owed across the Atlantic, to the United States, payable not in sterling, but in dollars. That detail matters because dollars are not printed in London. They have to be earned, mainly through exports, and Britain's export machine is already damaged. 4 years of total war forced factories to turn from goods to shells, and while Britain fought, rivals learned to sell. In Latin America, in Asia, in markets that once treated made in Britain as the default, new suppliers arrive. American industry expands. Japan pushes outward, and European competitors modernize fast. When British coal, steel, shipbuilding, and textiles return to peacetime, they return older, heavier, and more expensive than what the world can now buy elsewhere. You can feel a fork in the road opening in the early 1920s. One path accepts that the world has changed, that Britain must adjust wages, industry, and state policy to compete in a new landscape. The other path insists the decline is temporary and that normal can be restored by willpower, tradition, and the old rules of money. Britain's governing class chooses the second path.
In London drawing rooms and treasury offices, prestige becomes a policy goal, and prestige has a symbol. The gold standard, the pre-war system that ties a currency to gold at a fixed rate. To them, returning to gold is not just economics. It is proof that Britain is still Britain. But the real fatal choice isn't returning to gold. It's returning at the old pre-war exchange rate, $4.86 to the pound, as if the war never happened. In practice, that decision overvalues sterling, making British goods more expensive abroad and foreign goods cheaper at home, right when Britain desperately needs exports to earn dollars. An overvalued currency is a silent tax on industry. If you can't devalue the pound, you must devalue something else: prices, profits, and ultimately wages. And so deflation becomes policy, not accident. High interest rates, tight credit, spending cuts, and a deliberate squeeze designed to force the economy down to the value of a proud exchange rate. This isn't an abstract debate fought in textbooks. It is fought in factories, in ports, and in mining towns where pay packets shrink and jobs vanish. Unemployment climbs past 1 million, and for families already carrying the trauma of the trenches, peace starts to feel like another kind of war. In 1925, the gamble becomes official. Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, returns Britain to gold at the pre-war parity, urged on by Montague Norman of the Bank of England and the powerful instincts of the city. John Maynard Keynes warns publicly and sharply that the pound is overvalued by around 10%, a gap big enough to crush exports and pull the country towards social conflict. Keynes is not warning about theory. He is warning about pressure, about what happens when a government chooses to defend an exchange rate by forcing workers to accept lower standards of living.
In a country where the labor movement is organized and the memory of wartime sacrifice is raw, that pressure doesn't simply dissipate. It builds. It breaks first in coal. Mine owners demand wage cuts and longer hours because an overvalued pound makes British coal harder to sell, and deflation makes every debt heavier. For miners, it feels like being asked to pay for decisions made in London by men who will never go underground. In 1926, the confrontation becomes national. The general strike erupts, and for 9 days Britain is a country on pause. Around 1.7 million workers walking out, transport stalled, newspapers disrupted, power and production strained. The government answers with organization and propaganda, mobilizing the middle class, volunteers, and the machinery of the state to outlast the unions. The strike fails, but the damage doesn't end with the return to work. The lesson absorbed in Westminster is not that the policy was wrong, but that the country must be managed harder. The lesson absorbed in working Britain is that the system will defend money before it defends livelihoods. Then the world turns darker. The Great Depression hits, global trade contracts, and the gold standard, already a straitjacket, becomes a trap. In 1931, sterling comes under attack in a run, investors demanding gold and foreign currency, and the government responds with austerity, trying to prove its soundness to markets that are already losing faith. The crisis pierces the armed forces themselves. When naval pay is cut, sailors at Invergordon mutiny, a shock that signals something deeper than labor unrest. The state's authority is fraying under financial strain. The old prestige is collapsing in real time. And then, after all the sacrifice, Britain does what it swore it would not do. It leaves gold in September 1931, ending the experiment that had been treated as a matter of national honor. The pound falls, interest rates can finally come down, and exports begin to breathe again. Here's the twist that complicates the myth. Freed from gold, Britain recovers faster than the United States in the early 1930s, in part because it can cut rates and allow its currency to adjust. The very move that elites feared, abandoning the old rule, creates room for the economy to move. But the recovery is uneven, and the scars are long. A country of two Britons emerges, a booming South tied to finance and newer industries, and a devastated North and Wales marked by shuttered pits, idle shipyards, and long-term unemployment. In places like Jarrow, where desperation turns into a march for dignity, the nation sees what deflation and industrial decline look like on human faces. Politics hardens at the edges. Extremism grows across Europe and whispers in Britain too. And governments reach for protection and imperial preference, trying to bind the empire into a captive market. In the background, Keynes's warnings gain new power, not as ideology, but as a diagnosis proven by events. By the time the world slides toward another war, Britain enters it weaker than it admits. The empire still spans the map, but the financial core is compromised, dependent on American credit and American production in ways that would have once been unthinkable.
The Second World War will not only be fought with soldiers and steel, but with loans, exchange rates, and bargaining power. And Britain's bargaining power is slipping. When the fighting ends, the empire's true vulnerability is exposed. Britain must borrow again from the United States, and the price is not just interest, it is influence, and eventually, liquidation. Piece by piece, the imperial system that once financed the world becomes a system financed by someone else. The British Empire did not collapse in a single dramatic moment.
It weakened through choices, through a devotion to prestige over competitiveness, to fixed symbols over flexible survival, and to an old monetary normal that demanded real pain from real people. And in that quiet decision to defend the pound at any cost, you can hear the sound of a world order changing hands.